please.
Okay, there we go. All right, let's get started. So for those of you who are meeting us for the first time, our mission is to help nonprofit boards of directors and trustees achieve the highest standards of board governance. And we believe that board members can learn a lot from other successful board leaders. And so this is the first of a series of roundtables that will feature board members and board leaders talking about their experiences. Our next panel is in February and will be board treasurers, so look for that. Before I introduce our moderator, I have a brief poll. We want these events to be as convenient for as many people as possible. So we'd like you to answer a question about whether you like this time of day or would prefer something earlier or later. So I just launched that poll and it's only going to be up for a few seconds so we can really get started. Okay, thank you very much. Looks like 73% of you are happy here where you are. It's good for us to know. So let me introduce our moderator, Irfan Hasan. He is the Deputy Vice President for Grants at the New York Community Trust. There he directs the Healthy Lives grant-making program and oversees health, behavioral health, and biomedical research grants. He also oversees more than $10 million of grants to organizations designated as grantees through donor requests. He serves on several nonprofit boards, including ours. So thank you, Irfan, over to you.
Thank you, Barbara, and welcome everyone. Many of you know the New York Community Trust, which along with our affiliates in Long Island and Westchester, serve as the community foundations for the 8 downstate counties. One of the critical aspects to our grant making is to make sure that nonprofits we fund have good governance. And no matter how compelling a vision, how extraordinary a project, or how critical a service, if the governance isn't strong, it is unlikely that we would make a grant. I'm honored and, to be quite honest, a little intimidated being a moderator for this session on contemporary board leadership challenges, given the stellar panel we have. So I will keep my talking to a minimum and have the panel be able to share their thoughts. My job is basically to introduce the panel, get the discussion going, and be a timekeeper. And I hope that this will be more of a conversation anyway, and that the audience will ask questions in the chat function, and we will try to get to as many of them as we can. So on to the introductions. I'm joined by 3 spectacular nonprofit board leaders. They will share more about the organizations for whom they serve on the board. I'll just let you know that they manage these board roles while having day jobs and multiple other responsibilities. We have Cecilia Gentili, who is the founder and principal consultant at Trans Equity Consulting. We have Nick Berno, who is vice president and senior financial advisor at Edelin Kilmer and Associates. And we have Dr. Joseph Youngblood, Joe, who is the senior vice president for transformational learning and external affairs at Kean University. So on to the discussion. To open, please provide a quick description of the organization you chair. Let us know how long you have been in that role or on the board, and what you view as your most critical function as board chair. And we'll start with Cecilia, and then Joe and Nick jump in, and we're off to the session.
Hi, everybody. Thank you all for being here. So I'm so happy to be having this conversation with all of you. My name is Cecilia Gentili. I use gender pronouns she and her, and I am the co-chair of the New Pride Agenda, which is an organization working to better the lives of LGBTQ individuals throughout the state of New York. And doing that take many forms. We are very strong on policy change and working with government on creating changes that kind of like broadly make the goal that we have of bettering the life of LGBTQ individuals in the state of New York. And yeah, those were all the questions, Irfan, or I'm forgetting something.
How long have you been on the board?
I believe about 2 years. You know, with pandemic times, I don't really have like a number. I don't know. All the timing is kind of like blurry, you know. I don't know if it happened yesterday or 2 years ago, but I think more than 2 years.
Great, thank you. Nick.
Hi, I guess it's good afternoon now. And so my name's Nick Berno. And I'm chair of the board at the Rochester Museum in Science Center up in upstate Western New York, kind of nestled between Buffalo and Syracuse. And I've been on I'm about 80% through my term as chair. I'll be transitioning past chair in June, but like Cecilia mentioned, it's like operating in dog years at the chair level or any kind of level, because it's just the amount of time and effort it took. I know all of us, people on this call included, to work through some of these issues was a lot. So. But I've been on for 7 years, on the board total for 7 years. I chaired the finance committee for about 3. And the Rochester Museum Science Center is it's 110 years old. You know, so it's a storied institution in our community. It's ingrained in the minds of everyone around this region, and it's been a privilege for me. It's been a challenge for me. I'm the youngest chair in history of the 110 years by about 20 years. So I hope that I brought a new perspective and a new focus for the organization. But RMSC is like a 4-legged stool. We have a science center, which boasts hundreds of different STEAM oriented education programs. You know, we have a natural and cultural history museum where we care for 1.3 million objects, ranging from hundreds of millions year old fossils to one of the largest and most comprehensive collections of the Haudenosaunee Native American tribes in the world. We have a planetarium. Up until last year, well, as of last year, we have state-of-the-art Digistar 7 technology in the planetarium. It's a wonderful experience for people of all ages. And we have a Cummings Nature Center. So we have a 900-acre environmental science educational facility that's about 40 minutes south of Rochester. We're about an $8 million budget, which seems small to kind of encompass all those things, which is part of some of the challenges we face. But we have about 28 board members, 250 employees, part and full time. We have over 200 volunteers. We have close to 8,000 members pre-COVID. That's gone down a little bit, but we're working through it. And you know, what's my most important job is to keep all of that going. And being a good steward for the organization and making sure it lasts another 110 years.
Thanks, Nick. Joe?
Thank you. Good afternoon. And Nick, I guess we're also now following a chronological order. My organization has been around since 1874, so approximately 148 years. But my name is Joe Youngblood, and I have the privilege of serving as chair of the Board of Trustees at St. Francis Medical Center in Trenton. As I stated earlier, St. Francis was founded in 1874 when the Sisters of St. Francis drove horse-drawn wagons from the city of Philadelphia to create what they thought was going to be an educational providing organization to an underserved area just across the border from Pennsylvania and New Jersey in Trenton. When they got there, they did an assessment and realized that what was really needed was a health providing agency. And so in 1874, they created St. Francis Medical Center. We've been operating continuously ever since then. And we are still the only full service acute care teaching hospital in New Jersey's capital city, which is a really important piece in terms of what we know about population health related issues and the underserved communities around the state of New Jersey that are desperately in need of quality health care. St. Francis is still currently a member of the Trinity Health System, which is one of the largest multi-institutional Catholic healthcare delivery systems in the nation. Trinity operates in 21 states and has approximately 90 hospitals. I've had the privilege of serving on this board for approximately 14 years. I started as a community-based member, ironically, providing just services as an IRB external member, and then made my transition onto the board. I've chaired the Finance Committee, I've chaired the Quality Committee, and I've had the privilege of serving as the board chair since 2016.
Great, thank you. Wow, so we have a little over 250 years of boards presented. Obviously, none of you have been on it for that long, but this will be a great discussion. Coming back to just the past couple of years, which have really been like no other, certainly. Outside of obvious health and safety concerns for the staff of your organization, the clients, the patients that you serve, the members that you have, other constituents, as chair, what has kept you up at night? And what has been sort of not what you thought when you signed up for this role? Anyone can start and we'll just go.
Maybe we can just keep going with that order. We don't have to though. I'm just gonna take a first stab. I think like what kept me up at night was something that I'm very familiar with, which is called Impostor Syndrome, right? It is my first time being chair of any team, in this case, like a board. You know, as a transgender woman, like these kind of positions are not things that we kind of like see in our future and at any moment. And, you know, I went through the same with my first like job, you know, outside the sex work industry, or like my first manager position, you know. So this was like the next step of my imposter syndrome history, right? So, and I was like, am I doing the right thing? Am I doing what I'm supposed to do? You know, should I read more about the role of a chair? And, you know, I'm a co-chair, so I have like the support of a more experienced chair that was like, just do what feels right. Just do what feels right, and it's going to be okay. But you know, for a long time, as a new person in this kind of role, for me it was like this consistent fear of failure, of doing the wrong thing, because like, you know, you in my case, like, you know, I felt like I had, you know, over my shoulders a whole community that is so diverse, like the LGBTQ plus community, and you know, making decisions as a board can have strong repercussions over those that you care for. So it was that was what kept me at night. At the same time, we were looking for an executive director, so that took a lot of time in my head on like how to choose the right person, how to look at diversity, how to look at representing what our mission says in that person. But we made it, and now we have an amazing executive director. So those are the things that mostly kept me at night regarding the board work.
Wow. Hopefully you got some sleep.
It's funny how all those important discussions and decisions seem to kind of come all at once, you know, and especially during the time of a pandemic. And, you know, Cecilia, you mentioned kind of do what feels right. And, you know, to that end too, when you take on a role like this, it's a lot bigger and more involved, and it takes up a lot more brain space than you ever possibly can imagine. And for me, you know, it was certainly navigating the board governance, making sure that we're financially stable and getting through these times, making sure we're applying for and implementing COVID, PPP funding properly and all those types of things. But honestly, when the thing that kept me up at night, and I didn't, maybe this sounds bad or misdirected, but the thing that really kept me up at night was, how do we reach the kids in our community that are the most vulnerable And when things like school are shut down, when things like daycares are shut down, when things like our organizations are shut down, they're at risk. And that, to me, I was on another similar call to this, a large foundation call through Bank of America this morning, and they went through some of the numbers in Rochester in terms of we are at the top, if not the top position of the poorest communities in the country. And all the things that come with that we all know: domestic violence, single family homes, incarcerations, drugs and gangs and murders. We're the highest year-over-year growth in murder rates in our town, murders per capita. We're contrasted by all those things with some of actually the most and oldest cultural nonprofit organizations in the country. But there was this feeling for me that there was this community at risk. And I spent a lot of time. Another example, the superintendent from our city school districts is on our board, she's wonderful. And she gave me an example. There was another organization that raised money for laptops and Wi-Fi systems for some of the inner city school district children. And within a month, more than half of them were sold and out from under the kids. So they had no access to school. They had no access to our online programs that we created for them. And the disparities just grew. And we had to figure out a way to reach them. And that's, really what kept me up at night. And there's success stories of how we built kind of programs to support that group. But that, to me, shifted real quick. It got real quick. And that was on my mind a lot more than I ever anticipated it being.
Thank you. Wow. And you point out, Nick, and particularly for the 2 years before we go to Joe, that what we thought organizations could do, our missions that, for 110 years, were there for the public, suddenly there was a barrier that, was immovable.
And it became just a conversation about how do we get people to us, about how do we get to the community, which changed everything for us.
Yeah. Joe.
Thank you, Irfan. And let me apologize. Panelists can be like rogue agents. We never stay on task and don't answer the questions. So as a preface to responding to your second question, I do want to address the first question that I did not answer, which was, what did I view as my role as board chair? And very importantly for me, the most important role is keeping us focused as an organization. And this, again, is irrespective of any of the challenges in the atmosphere. So in times of storm and sunshine, keeping us focused on our mission, our core values, and our vision for the organization as the grounding feature that allows us to focus our energy as a board on those things that are going to keep the organization viable and connected to mission, core values, and vision. And so I see that, particularly as I stepped into the chairship, as the primary function that is really sort of my North Star in terms of board governance leadership, is to always keep us and bring us back and pivot back when we stray, because we often do, on mission, core values, and vision. And so that's how I would answer the first question that you asked us in the introductory part of the conversation. Secondarily, the things that kept me up at night over the last 5 years, and I say 5 years because for us as an organization, there were pre-pandemic realities that forced this board to have a much more predictive analytical framework about identifying challenges, because anyone who is in healthcare understands the unfortunate realities of keeping both rural and urban safety net hospitals viable, because the policy and regulatory landscapes don't necessarily invest in these organizations and in these hospitals in the way they should. Certainly when we look at the state of New Jersey, there were tremendous changes in charity care that had a direct impact on those hospitals that were serving underserved communities. And so we had to engage in what my colleagues at the University of Cambridge call planning is learning, to start the process of looking at data and trying to identify and prepare for those things that were predictable, with the understanding that there were going to be unpredictable things coming that, like the pandemic, that we could not have fathomed because there was no basis to even comprehend something of that nature. So our focus was to say, how do we find ways to make sure that we are continuing to support our community, again, a very underserved community? How do we, in the context of healthcare provision, make sure that our colleagues are healthy and that their well-being and engagement is a critical part of what we're doing and supporting as a board? And then how also in the context of the paucity of resources and the financial challenges that urban and rural healthcare centers face, how do we make sure that we are aggressively restoring and maintaining our operating income and performance, with the understanding that if we are not viable financially, we will not be here to provide the level and quality of service that we need to those communities. So with that, there was an understanding of the need to change leadership behaviors as well. So as we were predicting that there were going to be financial issues that could impact our standing, even within a large multi-state system, we kind of prognosticated that there could be some concerns around the future viability of the organization. And so we started a very intentional process of trying to predict what scenarios would help us protect our asset. And in our case, it was that St. Francis Medical Center is the sole holder of a cardiac certificate of need that allows us to be the cardiac center of choice for one of the largest counties in New Jersey. So how could we, again, engage in scenario mapping that would help us protect that asset, because we understood what that represented as a critical point of viability for us. And a lot of our education, training, and development really then centered around the strategies and structures that we needed to be in place to make sure that we were viable and that we could, again, continue to operate. So those were the things that kept me up at night. And receiving a call the week before we had our board vote to just sort of renew the succession plan and the order of leadership was by the CEO of our system, saying that they had made a decision at the board level that they were ready to divest all of the Trinity hospitals in the state, divest from New Jersey, meaning that they would be supporting partnership conversations for all 3 hospitals that were Trinity hospitals in New Jersey. So I'll put a foot stop there, because I think we'll be able to build off of what that represented as a pre-pandemic reality for our urban healthcare center.
As you then went into, a situation where, unlike Cecilia's organization, which is very much advocacy and service focused in improving capacity and services for a particular organization, and Nick, where you are a place-based, you do everything in the museum, most things in the museum. Your place, in addition, is a place where people probably flocked to far more in numbers over the pandemic, while you were also coping with this. Wow. Going on to the third idea, because board leadership in the nonprofit sector is, kind of what we do in our free time to have fun, right? It's volunteer capacity. We give of our time, sometimes our resources and our energy. So leading a group of volunteers in sort of good times can be difficult. How did you support your fellow team, your board members, because you're sort of the captain of the team? And how's the support that you provide them that, is sort of different than the support that you might provide the staff, whether you're talking about a 1, 2, 3 person staff altogether, or thousands of people? Because ultimately, the board, as I think you pointed out, Joe, has to stay focused on mission, vision, and core values, but operationally, it's the staff that makes those things happen on a day-to-day basis. So what did you have to do in particularly these 2 years in managing some of that? And assuming you got the staff, in Cecilia's case, you might have been juggling some of that at the same time as well. But
yeah. For us, we were like a new board, like a new organization, and we had to kind of cement you know, how the mission was going to translate into actual moves and specific actions, right? And it was like really a real hard time, because like when you talk about like policy, right, it's things that you can like really measure really soon. It's not like you're gonna change you know, policy in the state in 3 months. Maybe if you are like brilliant and you know you can do it, but policy usually take a long time. So it was like this important conversation for us to see how we could show results sooner than what the policy length usually is. And for that, at the same time, kind of like shift into like what the funding available was, right? Because with the pandemic, funding shifted to other things, and policy was not really the most important thing for funders, and it was also not the most important thing to fund for people, right? For donors, right? And like the way in which donations were given, especially in our community, the queer community, shifted dramatically to new ways of giving, like mutual aid, GoFundMes, and things like that. And people were not really giving much in the traditional sense of giving to an organization. So with respect of like how we supported, I don't think it was special for me as a chair, a way to support the rest of the board, but it was like a mutual commitment to support each other, and a mutual commitment to share, right? To share knowledge, to share resources, and to share space, right? As I said before, in my role, I was new into being in a board, into being a chair of a board, and for that, I received so much knowledge from people who had more experience, and also they were able to come to me for things that I could be more knowledgeable about, right? You know, I don't have friends with money, right? But I'm very good at asking for money. So introduce me with your friends that have money, and I'll get that money. You know, that's what am I good at? What are you good at? How can we both come together and make it work in a way that shows into the results that we're looking for? So I think like sharing resources has been very important. Sharing space, sharing moments in which yes, we do have a job to do, but I'm also gonna check on you and how you're doing, and how is, you know, many of our board members were like losing family members as we were going, right? So how can we meet and talk about reaching a goal, a financial goal, when you just lost your sibling or your friend, right? So navigating this situation in a way in which effectiveness continue to be a center, but at the same time, it was done with a focus that was in the person, in our whatever we were going through was fundamental, and that was not just a thing that happened from the chair down. It was a thing that happened as a whole for me.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I think we, you know, Cecilia, there's a lot of common, you know, thoughts here that you experienced and shared. And, you know, to me, you know, the difference I think before COVID was a little bit more of our focus was the CEO, right? As the chair, our governance, you know, processes were focused on supporting and advocating, you know, for our CEO. When COVID hit, you know, my role changed in terms of accessibility to the entire staff. And that was a big difference to balance all of a sudden, is that, you're not just supporting maybe the CEO and maybe in our case her senior staff, but it's the other 200 members of this organization are in the very similar situations that you talked about. They're getting sick. They're the uncertainty around all that COVID provided is scary, and they need somebody to understand that they're accessible and that they're listening. And for the first time, at least that I know of, the chair, I joined all staff meetings that our CEO had. I was on Zoom calls with them, and we really tried to communicate to the entire staff differently, and tried to engage them differently in terms of making this an opportunity, as opposed to constantly focusing on a lot of the uncertainty. And what came of that was incredible. The theme was think critically and creatively. And that's what we started to talk, to the staff about. And to go back to my conversation just about supporting the vulnerable in our community, one of our staff members came up and she heard me talking about that. She said, I have an idea for a club that we can have and that we can I think put together from an educational perspective. And so we did. It was called the Curiosity Club, and it ran all day from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. And it was fun. It was structured by our educational teams and programs, and we hired retired teachers or volunteered retired teachers to come in to help kids get access to computer systems they may or may not have had, to log into their Zoom calls with their teachers, to support them on science and technology and engineering and math problems, to supplement their education with science. We did other programs like coding, that was supplement to some of those educations. But that was one of the other wonderful things I just want to mention is that it was $50 a day. We needed to charge something because there was expenses, and we needed to charge $50 a day per kid. Now, there were families that could cover that, and there was families that couldn't cover that. What it turned into, with a lot of your conversations, Cecilia, talking about raising money, it turned into buy one, give one. And so the families that could afford $100 a day or $200 a day did, and they paid $200 a day. And we were able to take that and fund, the other, kids and children that weren't able to afford it. And it just turned into this wonderful program that we still have, today. And that came from speaking differently and being accessible, to the staff in a way that me and my predecessors in this role weren't before that. As for the board, it was along the same lines. As we all know, I think one of the things we all struggle with at this level is engagement. With a board, there's 30 members. They're extremely talented. They're extremely busy, and engaging them in this mission in a way that's helps them get out of it what they need to get out of it is important. And so we went to work. Again, we didn't stop our meetings. We didn't stop anything. We started a strategic planning process. We focused heavily on our DEI commitments to our community, to our organization. We established an action plan and implementation plan. We're in the middle of one of my favorite exhibits we've ever had at the organization, which was called Changemakers. And so the board was really, really engaged in that. We engaged Nikon. So Susan Weinrich at Nikon came in and did a board training with us with regards to how we structure our executive committees and the different committees throughout the boards, how we communicate more effectively, how we ended up, another kind of theme we had was prioritize and focus. And so we really wanted to prioritize the programs that we had to focus exactly on the missions that we wanted. And we ended up having to sunset some really, really beloved community programs. It was very difficult to go through those decisions, but the COVID gave us the time to really dive in and engage all of the talent of our board in a way in which we, just hadn't in the past, or maybe didn't even need in the past. But and that was maybe the engagement levels were just different kind of pre-COVID and after COVID for me kind of managing that. And it was time.
Yeah, right.
It was a lot of time.
Thank you. Before we go to Joe, just one quick question to your point, Nick. Somebody has asked around, do you expect the leadership change around engaging more directly with the team to be something to continue sort of in post-pandemic, or as we continue to live with the pandemic?
So it's a delicate balance we've found. It's a double-edged sword in that you want the staff to feel supported, but you also don't want the feeling that they can just go to any board member and create kind of discord or misdirections at times. And so it is a delicate balance. But what we've really asked the board to do is to go to committee meetings, right, and make sure they're engaging with the staff through the committee meetings. And so just really providing a structured way in which that happens, because we found that there was conversations going outside the board with staff members, and sometimes the game of telephone changes the communication a little bit, and all of a sudden you start to hear some different stories going on within the staff that aren't exactly the direction of the board. So it was a double-edged sword in that manner, trying to balance that. But as we're kind of moving through the committee structures, I really think that a positive, structured approach to having the board interact more with staff is positive. The leaders of the organization need to know the staff, and the staff need to know the leaders and their passions and what they care about and what drives them and why they're sitting making decisions about the strategic direction of the organizations they work for. So it's a complex balance, but I hope we can do it, responsibly and in a balanced way, and continue that forward. Yeah.
Thank you. Joe?
Thank you, Irfan, and thank you, Cecilia and Nicholas, for setting the context for my conversation, because I don't have to be redundant. I think you all provided tremendous insight into that question. My first reaction is to say hospital board management is so very different than service in other areas because of the nature of healthcare. So we have a very different relationship, and I've been on foundation boards and nonprofit boards, but the interaction and the exchange between hospital administrators and the governing body is really inextricably linked. Our CEO is a voting member of the board. All of the members of the senior leadership team are actively engaged. The board members are serving on committees. It is by mandate that we have medical staff, doctors who are voting members of the board. So I think a very different level of engagement that is just inherent in the process that enabled us in both of these crises that I referenced to already have the kind of synergistic relationship that we needed between management and the board to really sort of direct us through any of those challenges. So that was one asset that merely exists because of the nature of how governance and board leadership takes place in the hospital board service side of this. But I think in a really interesting way, and in an incredible twist of fate and irony, it was our preparation for what I would call a predictable threat, which was the potential threat of closure, that allowed us to be positioned and to have new capacities and capabilities that also allowed us as a smaller urban hospital to withstand all of the unfortunate realities of the pandemic. So our preparation for the predictable, which was to make sure that as a board, we were engaging in processes that allowed us to have the difficult conversations around issues of trust and transparency, to look at issues of our functioning as a board, our committee structure, and to embark upon an intentional training and development set of exercises that allowed us to be more adaptable and also more innovative in how we were looking at turnaround strategies to address the financial issues that existed, again, because of a multiplicity of reasons. Really gave us everything we needed as a board to be prepared to manage the unpredictable, which was this unfortunate and still ongoing pandemic. So when I mentioned earlier that our process to make sure that we were financially viable clearly indicated to us the need to change some leadership behaviors, it meant that we were intentional about focusing on things like trust. How are we communicating? How are we engaging the community? How are we engaging colleagues to make sure that people were engaged in every aspect of what we were doing? Really was the silver lining that allowed us to withstand the realities of the pandemic that had an unprecedented impact on healthcare systems all across the country. So that intersection for us of saying that if you are in a crisis and for the first time having a conversation about things like trust and preparedness, you're already very much setting yourself up for failure. We didn't have to deal with that because we set the table with an understanding of what we needed to do to prepare for a very predictable threat. But again, it gave us the wherewithal and the capacity that we needed to have systems and structures in place that allowed us to navigate the pandemic as well. And what we know is that the preparation and all of the measures that we're taking for the predictable threat meant that we were viable, because I don't know what the health and wellness of this community would have been if there had been a hospital closure in Trenton prior to the pandemic. And of course, everyone in this region understands that New Jersey and New York were at the epicenter of the pandemic when it first started. And so the drain on the systems was extraordinary. But a lot of those systems that we built to prepare for the predictable and the unpredictable became a part of our ability to withstand, and again, to mitigate a lot of the risks that some hospitals just were not able to do in the first surge.
Thank you. And that actually sort of is a really nice lead into both question that I have, as well as something that that one of the audience members asked. And it sort of relates to this idea of governance and the fact that board members, you know, are expected to sort of know how to govern in good times and bad times. And while here's a shameless plug for board strong's good practices for good boards, but you know, you can certainly learn stuff online and through seminars. But talk a bit about what did I guess the key aspects of thinking about managing through this pandemic with the governance role that you as the board chair employ. And along with that, there's a question from the audience which fits right in, speaking a bit about the relationship between the board chair and the CEO, because I think, you know, you clearly, Nick, you mentioned it with, as you opened up to the staff. Cecilia, you spoke about the fact that you were hiring a CEO while juggling all of this. So just that bit about, you know, governance and, you know, what was the key aspects of good governance that stuck with you through this, and then the relationship between the board chair and the executive in particular. How does that play into all of this stuff that we've had to do in certainly the past 2 years, but obviously for years before that as well?
I think for us as a new organization, and at the same time as a new organization that came back from an old organization and had so much pressure to kind of like undo certain histories of the past. For us, the most important thing was to translate the mission and the vision into the actual work, and how that was going to reflect in the board itself, in the election of the executive director, and in the staffing of the rest of the organization. And specifically for us, that showed in understanding that this was to be done with the focus on the diversity that we claim to uplift in terms of the LGBTQ plus community, and also understanding that in certain levels is always, I was always going to come up short, right? I am a transgender person, so I am part of the LGBT community. I am a person of color. I am an immigrant, but I have no idea how being a trans person in between Rochester and Buffalo looks like, right? Because I live in the city. right? So kind of like translating, our mission that is to uplift people throughout the state. I cannot fully understand the realities. And the idea was that, but we could, as a board, all together, get to the closest, right? So, and that was important to translate in having like the most diverse way of showing up as a board. So I would say the diversity was very important in translating the mission and the vision through the choosing of the executive director and creating a relationship with the executive director where she feels that she is trusted and supported, and at the same time is still under a board, right? So finding that balance was really important for us. I'm very happy to say that I believe we're navigating it very well. We have a great executive director who does not hesitate on calling you and saying like, hey, I need this and I don't know how to get there. Help me out. And there, I can call other board members and create little team and tackle that. I just, we are not at the point of, I wish I was like what Joseph said, that, of preventing, of thinking, ahead. We are just starting to think ahead of what are going to be the issues that we will face, during the year and next year. So I really appreciate your comment, Joseph, about like kind of like looking ahead of those issues. So we are still not there yet, but we're working into it.
Thank you. Nick?
Yeah, Cecilia, your comment about trust and support of the CEO is really the crux of the relationship between the two, right? And our CEO is relatively new. She's 3 years into the role. A national search landed us one of the best talents in the nonprofit world, and it was come down to a couple of things. I mean, we do regular check-ins every Monday morning. We spend an hour together. There's half of that meeting is agenda. The other half is just supporting and each other in terms of how to navigate some of these issues and communications. And we made another thing is we made a commitment to no surprises in terms of transparency. And if something wasn't going right, I can't find out about it a month when something blows up, and vice versa. And there was a commitment to transparency and honesty. If I was hearing something from board members about her executive leadership styles, I was going to tell her how uncomfortable that was going to be, and vice versa. If she heard things about my leadership, I wanted to hear about it too, because we got to get better. We got to make ourselves better together. And along those lines was we implemented this year a more reflective, thoughtful process around her performance. And a little bit more of a 360 oriented like review of her, and not just financial, right, but things with regards to leadership styles and communication and public relations and fundraising and financial management and administration and planning. And so really just committing to giving her what she needs to be successful in that role, and communicate it and benchmark it along the way. So that relationship has turned into a friendship, and I think that's important as well. You need to be able to trust each other with that. So that's kind of how we approach that relationship. Broadly about good governance, we again, you find out in the last 2 years if you got a good operating board or not. It came to the surface pretty quickly if you were able to weather this storm or not. And our board was, but there were pockets of issues that kind of came up. And again, an older board, and what we found was, it was a pretty centralized decision making in the board. There was a few people that had been on for a long time that are very talented. I've learned a ton from these people. But it was really time to start to decentralize the management and the operations of the board and kind of flatten that a little bit. Not totally, but a little bit. And so we really went through that process. It was difficult at times. We had a board, we had an executive, we have a 30-person board and a 14-person executive committee, right? How do you manage communications between people in the know and people not in the know? And that's what we found, is that there was this, this group that felt not included and this group included. And so it was really about, in a sense, decentralizing the way we make decisions and this engagement idea of board members that may not be on the executive committee. And we really did that with the introduction of task force.
Right.
This task force idea that we implemented really is changing the way this organization is making decisions at that level. And it allows us, for example, of course, I won't get into details, but we're facing right now a really important time in our organization's history with regards to supporting a large construction project on our campus. And that can change for generations the way that people and organizations and the community use us. And that's not just an executive committee decision anymore. We brought in 10 people from the board, I think 3 people from the executive committee, and 7 people that are outside of that, that have skill sets in commercial real estate, that have skill sets in construction, that have skill sets in the programs and the educations that will be supporting that new construction project, community educators. So this idea of bringing in more people, decentralizing that type of decision making, I think, and what I've seen in a short period of time, because we did it with our DEI process, we brought in people who were very, very focused on those processes for organizations like ours. And we're doing the same with this task force. We're building another one for the board restructure. We're going to be looking at restructuring the board a little, not crazily, but just in terms of committee structure and things. And I'm already seeing that it is providing much more thoughtful outcomes. It's creating much more inclusive environments for people to participate and communicate and engage in a way that I think is going to make our organization and the outcomes that the board come to much better over time.
Great, thanks. And Rec, thank you, Nick. That's great. That's very important in terms of thinking about the practical aspects of how do you do this and the connection with the CEO. Joe, I think you have the closing word since we're getting there, and you have the added challenge of having a CEO who is a core board member, I think you mentioned. So it does create a different level of challenge.
Absolutely. And the CEO who in our system structure has a direct reporting relationship to the board and also to the CEO of the system. So again, creates a really interesting dynamic. But what we recognized very early on in the pandemic, and this is meant both literally and figuratively, is that our relationship was the difference between life and death.
Yeah.
And so what that meant for us was the opportunity to build on the trust that was already established, and to make sure that we were accessible to each other, if that meant 2 a.m. in the morning. At the end of the day, Nick, we had our standard 1-week check-in as well. That became a multi-day check-in simply because of the nature of the pandemic and all of the crises that were centered around that. And what we discovered is that it sent a message of unity, both to the board, but also to our colleagues and to members of the community in terms of instilling trust. That people knew that we were on one accord and that we were operating that way. And there was already trust established, even when there were opportunities for the board to weigh in on decisions that were well within their rights. They understood how important it was because of the timing and the issues to say, we trust that our board chair and our CEO are going to manage this in ways that are aligned with our thinking and our values around a particular issue or decision. So that was incredible. I mean, at the end of the day, I would come home, and before my wife would ask how my day was, she would ask, how was Dan's day? So the understanding of what that relationship represented to us being able to manage this very difficult period was an essential one. And in closing, Irfan, I want to build on a point that Nick made about the importance of board demographics and the recruitment of expertise. Certainly in the context of hospital management and administration and governance, it is a very complex set of issues and responsibilities that you have as a fiduciary to that organization. We were very intentional, and again, relying on development opportunities by organizations like Board Strong and Board Effect to really do the critical work that we needed to, so that we could focus on the things that were going to strengthen us and strengthen our resolve to withstand any of these potential threats that were out there. And to the issue of the need and the board's understanding of the need for a different set of behaviors, when we were told that we were going to go into a potential merger and acquisition phase, we had a very different leadership succession plan. And for the first time in my history on the board, it wasn't just a pro forma vote where we said the current vice chair and the second vice chair are going to transition into the chair and the vice chair person's role. So let's just, we'll take a motion from the floor. There was a very intentional conversation that meant that the two people who became the new leaders were not in the line of succession, because our board had the maturity and the understanding to say that as we go into this phase, having a chairman who brings legal experience that Joe brings to the table, who has the connectivity to the community, and who is a policy professional and in politics in New Jersey, is going to be an essential element to us. On the side of hospital management and leadership, the person who became the vice chair in my administration was a former CNO who had worked in large healthcare systems in 4 or 5 different states. And the board made a conscious decision to say, these are the skills that we need in the context of what we know may be coming for the future of the organization. And the board made a very courageous decision. In fact, the 2 people who were next in line said, we will remove our nomination so that we can have our 2 colleagues step up and take the wheel, if you will. I thought was just a really important illustrative example of a board that was prepared, that had taken advantage of all of the training and the development that sometimes we take for granted, particularly when times are great. But that becomes the critical piece that gives you the resilience that you need to manage and mitigate any of these threats and issues that may manifest.
Thank you, Joe. That is just such a perfect ending for thinking about board governance and the challenges of board chairs. I want to thank all of you for spending this hour with us, sharing your thoughts, and to the audience who joined us. And I'm hoping that this will be the first of many conversations that we'll have with Board Strong and all of you on this. And for those of you in the audience, if you want to know more about board governance, how do you get board members, how do you become a better board member, how do you work in challenging situations with board members, call Board Strong. Thank you all very much. This will be available for your review shortly, and have a great afternoon. Thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you.